Welcome to Rico 12. I'm Justin, your host and a beautifully imperfect, stumbling, bumbling child of an absolutely powerful and perfectly loving God and an addict. Rico 12 is all about exploring the common threads of addiction and sharing tools and hope from those on a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and places to learn and support one another. Our speakers represent various fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, thus showing the common thread of recovery, no matter our addiction or affliction. Today's speaker for the 274th meeting is Rax A first-time Rico 12 speaker. Her chosen topic today is deepening emotional sobriety with AA and CODA, and I look forward to hearing her message here in a few minutes. First, for some business. First of all, for next week, our guest speaker had to reschedule for a future week. So right now, I have an opening for next week's Rico 12 meeting. If you in the listening audience, whether live or in the podcast world, have some powerful recovery and have a topic that you feel you would like to share on and do a Q&A on, please message me directly here in the live meeting or send me an email to rico12pod@gmail.com and we'll get that lined up. I'm not super concerned about it. We'll have somebody come in, but did have a reschedule have to happen just in the last day or so. But Rico 12 has several recovery resources in our family of podcasts and social media communities. To learn more, listen more, connect more, or just hang out and learn and grow with us, you can check out our other podcasts that you can find at rico12.com. That's RECO12.com. And if you'd like to join in our social communities and check out the chat, you can check out the chat in the show notes and you can join us there. Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue our mission. Thanks to our spearheads for new and repeat contributors. Really appreciate all of you. Your donations really help in this project. If you also feel the desire to become a spearhead and support this cause, visit rico12.com/support or click on the links that I'll post in the chat and the show notes for one-time or monthly donation options. Your support, not just financially, but with your word of mouth, makes a difference in keeping us able to share these messages of recovery. We look forward each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for today, Rax, and give a little background information on her. Here we go. Rax got sober from drugs and alcohol on September 12th, 2011. She started working the steps of Codependence Anonymous in September of 2022. And she currently is a sponsor, and is working CODA and AA steps. Rax has held CODA workshops in Florida, held service positions at different district levels, and always does service at the group level. She's always looking for ways to get out of her own way and into boundaried service. Take it away, Rax. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Justin. Such a honor and privilege being here today to share a little bit about my journey as well as what my recovery looks like now. So I just wanted to take a moment and, just share some gratitude to everyone who's here, who's listening, for not only being here, but also just to give yourselves kind of a moment to be in appreciation of your own recovery, because I think it's completely underestimated, or at least I underestimate how powerful it is that today I'm sober and that I'm still alive, which is also such a miracle. So congrats for being here, everyone. So my journey started when I was obviously younger, and I started drinking from a relatively young age, and but not necessarily alcoholically. I don't remember the first time I drank, so I couldn't go that far back. But the thing that I found to be the most difficult in the beginning of my journey was the obsession of the mind. And I didn't realize that was what, made me different from others. I honestly didn't even know that people could drink or use or whatever and not have a problem. I just thought everyone was kind of the same when it came to drugs and alcohol. And the first time that I started to kind of really feel powerless over my addictions was when I was around the age of 21. I mean, I really felt it before, and I think there was this piece of me that just kind of never felt like I was enough. Um, I was always kind of consumed with these thoughts of like wanting to numb out, with wanting to not feel, but it was so natural that it didn't seem like it was something wrong. And for a long time, and it talks about it in the big book where, you do kind of this, you're, I'd I'd do cleanses. I would do all these different things to kind of try to chase this feeling of being okay, but I never looked at drugs and alcohol as the problem during that time. So when I was 21, I went to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, looked around the room and said, I must not be an alcoholic because I'm young. And and I didn't listen to really anything that anyone was saying at the time. I only kind of saw the differences. So fast forward, I got sober from drugs and alcohol in 2011, as was mentioned. And that was at the time I was 26. So between 21 and 26, it was a lot of that kind of incomprehensible demoralization, aka really running my life into the ground, to where I would, it was kind of like I became this like feral human on the earth where the only thing that really mattered to me was getting more and more messed up, and not really being present for my life. And I think the most incredible gift that I was given was, despite all of that, I still had this really, really deep desire to change my life. And I couldn't really shake it. I knew that I wanted something different. I wanted to have, it was almost like I was like looking out into a life that I really wanted, but it always felt like too far away for me. Like something like my addictions were essentially holding me back from that life and that reality. Um, but I knew it was something that I was just like driven to have. Like, and how I would describe it is this like peace and serenity, right? And I didn't know that at the time that that's what that was, but now in recovery I can see that like that's what I was like essentially reaching for, even if it looked like something external, right, or masked as something external. It truly was just that deeper feeling of being okay. um and not feeling so the rat race in my head. So it was how it sounded, and then I'm going to get into what my recovery looked like. Was I would wake up, I'd be like, all right, today is the day, I'm not going to drink or use or whatever, fill in the blank. And then I would do it all over again, and I could not for the life of me figure out why I couldn't stop. um and funny enough, and I'll get into it in a moment here, but like I learned more about that this year. So anyways, so I'm a little all over the place, but that's essentially what it looked like. Even if I could go one day without drinking or using, all I would do is obsess about it. And it was essentially my higher power. Like it was like the ruler of my world. So I'm 26, and I, at the time, so the first meeting I went to was on Oahu. At the time I was living in Hawaii, and then I moved to Colorado, and I got sober in Denver, Colorado. Um, and uh, my program looked like, going to meetings, working with others, being of service. Um, And everything got better. And even despite the like really difficult times, um, things things started to get really good. And I was relieved of that compulsion to use or drink. But there was still a certain level of powerlessness in my life, and I didn't realize I was still feeling that way because I would meditate. I do everything that was requested in the 12 steps. And the really cool thing about, I'm going to divert just for a second. The really cool thing about the 12 steps, if you haven't done them in whatever respective program you're in, is it truly gives you freedom. It gives you that freedom, and it gives you a structure and guideline to live your life in a way that without it, for myself, or speaking for myself, I wouldn't have been able to. So it's a tool that constantly continues to ground me and give me the sanity that naturally I don't have. Like, it's just how, for whatever reason, these were the cards that I was dealt. Um, so things got better, but I still felt kind of this somewhat powerlessness. And it wasn't until 2022 when I was introduced to Codependence Anonymous. Funny enough, it was around the same time, and it was by a therapist that I was seeing, and by my sponsor. They both recommended it. They didn't know each other. It was just kind of one of those God shot type situations. Um, and so I started my journey on Codependence Anonymous. And from the work that I've been doing in Codependence Anonymous, as well as Alcoholics Anonymous, I've found a new kind of like emotional sobriety that I didn't realize was possible. um, so there's a couple parts in the big book that I want to talk about, and then in the Codependence Anonymous literature that I wanted to touch on briefly. And in it, I think because they play into a little bit more of that emotional recovery that I've gotten in the last year, and it's always changing, right? And today I might have good emotional sobriety, and tomorrow I may not, or tonight I may not. And so it's a constant back and forth kind of pendulum. And for me, some of the tools that have worked really well have been a combination of both programs. So actually, before I got into the little bit of reading, I just want to say that from Codependence Anonymous, I had essentially turned people into my higher power. And that's probably the easiest way that I can state it, to the point where I felt completely, even though I was someone who was sober, I felt completely powerless over a decision another person would make. At the time, I didn't feel like I didn't know how I felt. I couldn't even identify my feelings. And by doing the work of Codependence Anonymous, it has given me the tools of learning how to take care of myself, which sounds so silly. Like, I don't know why it sounds silly, but having various forms of self-care, and what that means to me is acceptable with whatever that means to me. So the definitions of self-care, the boundaries that I need for myself, and the boundaries that so setting internal boundaries for myself, as well as setting external boundaries. There's no right or wrong in any of it. And then another really big gift that I've gotten and tool that I've gotten to use from Codependence Anonymous is understanding what my feelings are. Apparently, I didn't know you could have your own independent feelings of another person's feelings. So while I've learned how to let someone else in my life be angry and upset, I'm also allowed to be happy, tired, and excited about something. Um, and and so utilizing that as well as my AA recovery, um, what I've found is learning and uh, what I call more of like a boundaried service. Because in recovery, especially if you're in any non-people program, we learn a lot about service work, and actually in all programs we learn about service work. But and I truly think it's very important. It was honestly how I was able to stay in the rooms, was just from showing up, being of service to others, and having a service position, all of those things. And I believe they are critically important to a program. And now I'm learning, where am I being of service to others, and also where do I need to be of service to myself? Because I'm really good at abandoning myself and abandoning what my needs are, sometimes not even checking in on what my needs are, just for the sake of others. And I believe that by ignoring my own needs, and that could be for rest, that could be for food, it could be very simple, like the HALT acronym: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. It could be something as simple as that. And when I deny that, I'm then starting to decouple and disconnect from my higher power. Because for me, my higher power, I can connect with it within my soul through prayer and meditation. And sometimes my higher power is trying to communicate to me, hey, you really got to slow down. And as a codependent, I I will abandon and ignore that every day of the week if it means that I can help another human. And so learning and practicing how to tap into that relationship with my soul um, has been really powerful. So I'm going to read this part in the big book. It's on page 24. This is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous specifically. And it's going to tie back into kind of some of the pieces that I'm talking about. So the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice and drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and the humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. And that's deeply relatable. That pretty much sums up like my career, right? My drinking career. The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. Now, this part, I worked with my sponsor. I have a newer sponsor, I should say, in the last year. When I moved, I now live in Los Angeles. And we've been going piece by piece through the big book, which has been absolutely incredible, completely different way that I've done the steps. And this part really, I've read it so many times, never once thought a whole lot about it. But as we were talking about it, she said, and you can think of this in any area that you have any type of recovery, right? So if you think about it, we're going to put our hand on a hot stove. So, what does that mean? I put my hand on a hot stove and it burns my hand. Someone else who is not, and I'll just speak to alcoholism, is not an alcoholic. They'll put their hand on a hot stove, they'll burn their hand, and they won't do it again because they're like, I burnt my hand. Why on earth would I do that again? My hand is burned. Um, how I am, I will actually put my hand back on that hot stove and I won't stop putting my hand on that hot stove. I'll burn it and then I'll be like, ow, that hurt really bad, really, really bad. All those days, all those hangovers hurt. And then I'll do it again. And then I'll do it again. And then I'll do it again. And I can't understand why I can't stop when the only thing I want to do is to stop putting my hand on the hot stove. So that's a great question. Why can't I stop? And this is the most incredible gift that I've gotten this year is the reason that you can't stop or why you end up putting your hand on a hot stove, if it's relapse or, and even if it's like, for me, like a codependent relapse, right? Whatever that looks like. It is because my relationship with my higher power isn't big enough. I'm not trusting my higher power. Until I can grow my relationship with my higher power and continuously assess and evolve it, I'm going to put my hand on that hot stove. And so I think that's something for me that like has continued to kind of keep my feet to the fire. I don't know, maybe that's kind of a bad saying after putting my hand on a hot stove. But that's it. And I've read the book so many times, and she's like, it's all about growing your spiritual experience and your spiritual relationship. And the further you have away from a drink, the more critical it becomes because we already forgot. I pretty much would forget after, a few hours of being violently hungover what was happening. And then I would drink again. So I think it's such a good reminder of the unmanageability, the pain, all of it, the torture, I guess, that we kind of go through, and the lack of freedom, that powerlessness truly is because of the deficiency of the spiritual relationship. So what that looks like for me this year, and then I'm going to wrap up here in just a moment, is it's diving into this different area of recovery. At the time I was 11 years sober when I started CODA, and I didn't realize how deficient I kind of was in a certain aspect, or agnostic, I guess you could say, of my life. And by continuously staying open and reassessing my program, I'm on kind of a critical mission because I don't want to relapse. I don't want to go back to how my life was. And even just with the people programs, the pain of like someone saying no to me. I don't want to experience that, right? I want people to be able to say no in my life and it not shake me to the core. And so it looks like, as I mentioned, the self-care, learning boundaries, understanding my feelings, prayer, meditation, tying all those pieces into my life. I go to meetings, I would say on average, like 3 to 5 days a week. And that's something that hasn't really changed in the last 12 years. Because I need the emotional sobriety in my life. Otherwise, I know that I'm going to be putting my hand back on the stove. So, with that, I think that's all that I have to say today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rax, for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. I know that I've written down a handful of questions here for you. For you in the live audience, if you have a question you'd like to ask Rax, please type it in the chat. If you want to stay anonymous, direct message it to me or say anonymous, please. And I won't announce your name in the recording. If you don't mind, I'll announce your first name in the recording. All right. So Rax, as you shared, there were a couple of things that jumped to mind, and I want to jump to one of them that was most recent. So it was later in your share. You talked about you don't want to relapse, and and the way I heard that was in CODA, in codependency. What does a relapse look like in CODA, and is what would be like the definition of sobriety in CODA? What does that look like?
I think that for me at least, it looks like I've talked to I have a Power of Five group. If anyone's in Codependence Anonymous, you'll know what it is. But it's like a group, pretty much like a sponsorship type group, right? Where you're all working the steps together. And in CODA for me, working the program is a moment by moment thing. And we talk about how difficult it is to sometimes navigate in people programs when you relapse and when you don't. Now, because of the ambiguity at times of what that looks like, for me, it would truly just be completely stepping away from the program and avoiding self-care, avoiding, talking about my feelings, like kind of a deep regression into the patterns and behaviors that I naturally kind of fall to. Um, and being in codependent recovery is for me just working the steps and then moment by moment acknowledging, oh, okay, this behavior is coming out of this space, so it's more of like a moment by moment type of recovery, I guess you could say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Rex. Speaking of the moment by moment to moment recovery there, you talked about halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. How do you moment to moment stay aware of those aspects as well as any other things that may cause disconnection from higher power? How do you keep that in, whether top of mind or at least in your consciousness throughout your day?
Yeah, I think that it's almost like a constant check-in. Like my prayer and meditation practice is pretty loose. And by that, I mean, I don't wake up, perfectly. I'll sometimes just lay in bed, do a little bit of meditation, whatever. But how I've crafted over the years, I guess up to this point, which could change tomorrow, my practice is that I do like just a little check-in each moment. And sometimes I can tell by how I'm reacting to the external world or listening to what's going on in my mind. And that's usually when I'm like, wait, pause. And pause has become my BFF. I've CODA has really helped with the pausing big time. AA has too, but I think CODA really like drives it home. And so in that pause, I'm actually taking those moments to meditate. And when I do that, it's kind of like my little check-in of like, hey, how's it going? You know what I mean? With my higher power. And I might get that like intuitional hit of like, go eat a sandwich, you know?
I love that type of guidance, that in that pause. Hey, go eat a sandwich. I mean, you think, well, is that really higher power speaking to me? Well, probably. Higher power cares about that kind of stuff. Is that your experience also?
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. All right, we have a question from our live audience. This is from Justine. Justine says, "How do you balance both programs in your life with meetings, steps, sponsorship, etc.?"
I definitely I would say my AA recovery is always my number one because if I had to rank them, because I know that without AA recovery, the chance of me having codependent recovery is pretty small. Just because it is very time consuming being an active drug addict or alcoholic. When my whole life is kind of focused around my next drunk or high. So how I balance it now though is that it's just a non-negotiable for me. There's my home group, and I make sure I've never not had a home group Except I think when I was moving, there was like maybe a couple weeks where I didn't. But I have a home group, and so I'm like, I have to go show up. I'm the treasurer of the home group, so I just show up for that service position. And that is a gift of codependency, is that it kind of like I codependently show up. Not that you need to be a codependent to show up for service, but it helps keep me accountable. And then it's just become a habit over the years where if I need to work through something, I have a huge, at this point, network of people that I can call. But here's what I would, for anyone who's new, anyone who's just starting, because I feel like we're all at different spaces and places in our life. Sometimes it's just something really small, and it might be coming to a Zoom meeting once a week. You know what I mean? Depending on what program you're in. And finding ways to connect with your higher power outside of the meetings has helped me become more connected to everything else. So I I don't know if that really answers your question super well, but I think it's just for me really around habits, like years of like picking up the phone when something's wrong, raising my hand when when the question is asked for who's available to sponsor. And then within that, I have boundaries, right? So, for example, at this point, may change in the future, I only sponsor 2 people at a time because I know that otherwise I could turn my sponsees into my higher power, right? So it's figuring out what boundaries you need to take care of yourself in the confines of recovery and then outside of recovery. And how are you able to bring those tools and things into your life one way or another? And the last thing I'll say on it, when I first got sober, I really truly felt like there was like, I'm going to check off the whole list. I'm going to get an A in AA and I'm going to like ascend into the sky or something. I don't know what I really thought, but be kind to yourself, like meet yourself where you're at and what you need right now for your program. And it might look different from the other person, but I'm telling you, if you feel intuitionally like, and you connect with your higher power and you're like, all right, I got to get into more action in my recovery, then follow that. If you know what I mean, your relationship with your higher power is so extremely personal, but it's what's going to keep you here today. And so sometimes it's better to blank out the noise of everyone else and what their programs look like and how good, how far along they are in the steps, how quickly they got through them, who they're working with, right? All of that's just noise. Take a moment to just sit with your higher power and see what works best for you and your schedule and meet yourself where you're at, is what I would say.
Love that. And I love that talk on boundaries. Boundaries is a tricky topic a hard topic for me and for so many other people. You talked about internal and external boundaries. Can you give us an example of an internal boundary that you have and one of an external boundary and what the difference is and how they work together?
Yeah. When I learned about internal boundaries, my mind was like blown. So, and this was maybe a few months ago. This is pretty recently that which is silly. It's like we hear things in the world, right? But I guess our brains probably only retain such a small percent. So I'll start with internal boundaries. Internal boundaries are your thoughts, right? So for me, I've always just let my mind go kind of like whatever it's thinking, right? Whatever it's obsessing on, whatever it kind of wants. It's free range up there. And having an internal boundary could be, I'm like, let's say I'm really hurt by someone and I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop kind of obsessing about this. And I'm using my tools, my 10th step or whatever I need for my program, but I can't shake it out of my mind. An internal boundary would be, okay, I'm going to let myself be upset about this for 10 more minutes. And then I'm actually going to take a break. And I'm going to give myself 24 hours to stop thinking about this. And every time that that thought kind of comes back in, I say, actually, right now, my boundary, my internal boundary is that I'm on a break right now from these thoughts. But I'll come back to it after that boundary is up or whatever. And that's a little bit more of like maybe, I don't know if it'd be an extreme example, but and then another internal boundary might be something as simple as, which is a little bit on the gray zone of internal external, which would be I need to I really have a desire to start going to bed earlier, right? And so that boundary would then be getting ready for bed at 9 o'clock, setting the alarm, right? And that's a boundary that, like, I'm not asking anyone else to hold. It doesn't have really anything to do with anyone else outside of myself. External boundaries for me might be, and one of the coolest things that I ended up learning about that, which is so funny, shook me was that you can request a boundary of someone. Like, you can say, hey, I don't want you to talk about whatever, right? Which would be more of like that external boundary. You're requesting something of someone. But to withhold the boundary would actually be on you, not them. And it's kind of put boundary setting a little bit on its head for me, because I've had to find ways that, so for example, I don't like the sound of landscaping, right? And this is a simple example. I don't like it. I don't like when the landscapers are, using their equipment. So then how I set that boundary is I don't go out and say, hey, turn it down, stop doing the landscaping, I put headphones on. And so because that's my boundary to re-regulate myself, that's me using a tool, right, to kind of keep myself centered and grounded. Yeah, and I could talk more about boundaries, but that's probably pretty good.
No, I think that's really powerful. And I love how you said, when I set up an external boundary that I don't want, well, we'll just use the one you said. I don't like the sound of landscaping equipment, rather than going out and making a big scene in the neighborhood or whatever, saying, hey, you're too loud, turn, go away. You put the headphones on yourself. And I think that's really powerful. That way you have the opportunity to keep your serenity and not affect, others around you. And I think that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Have another thing from our live audience. This is from Cheryl. And Cheryl says, thanks, Rax, for your share. Love that you've considered codependency in service, something I'm becoming more aware of. For you, as a recovered alcoholic and a recovering codependent, how do you know when you are hearing God's voice through others, either through your sponsor or through other fellows, or when you might just be falling into codependent patterns in the fellowship?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think, and I'm going to go back to what I was talking about previously, which is the pause, right? And usually, for me at least, I'm able to tell because I'll kind of sit with it for a moment, and I'll just kind of tap into my connection with my soul, I guess. My connection with my higher power, which to me is kind of like my soul, right? That's my plug. Um, and I can usually gauge at that point, and I know it's a kind of an ambiguous answer, but I would say the tool that I would use to discover if I was, you know, maybe getting a message I need to hear, whatever, or if I was just being codependent, would be in the pause. Now, the one thing that I will say is I do also deeply trust that, like, everything, every experience, every interaction is kind of my higher power, guiding me or teaching me something or showing me something. And so there are times where I'm like, okay, this person had a really good message. Let's say someone's kind of like trauma dumping on me or something. Um, and I'll be like, wow, that's a big experience they're going through. And then I'll kind of check in, and I might feel like, okay, I need to step away from that conversation, right? So it's a little bit of like um balance, that I'll like a balance beam that I'll go on, where, or whatever that thing is when you're a kid.
Like a teeter-totter thing?
Teeter-totter, that's the word,
Yes.
not balancing, teeter-totter. Where I'll just need to do that constant pause and check in, really.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to go back to a previous question about boundaries. Jasmine asked a question that I think is a solid one to build on this. What do you do when others reject your boundary or get upset or disappointed when you hold a boundary, especially for someone who's a people pleaser? You know, what do you do in that instance?
Oh, I love a good people pleasing. That's like my favorite activity. It's my favorite hobby. Um, you know what? That is honestly where the magic is. And that's where I get to really grow as a person. And in Codependence Anonymous, if you've ever been to a CODA meeting, they talk about crosstalk, and that crosstalk is discouraged, right? And the reason for that is because we're learning to allow other people to have their own emotions and feelings. And I'll circle back to the boundary part. But when it comes to other people's reactions, it's not like I don't, and if I do something that's upset someone, I do my best to like come back around and own up to it, right? I don't want to be out there like hurting people ever. Um, but the letting people's experience be theirs and not mine to take on. And it is such a difficult practice, but really rewarding when I can stand in a boundary or stand in something that I need, and someone be like, I don't agree, I don't like that. And I let them have their own experience, and I don't try to change that experience, right? And so I think the people pleasing comes up when I want to change other people's experience, or I'll push mine down or morph mine so that way they're okay. Now, when it comes to setting a boundary that I've communicated with someone, maybe even multiple times, I may need to reassess what that boundary looks like and how I can start taking responsibility for that boundary. So, I know we're going back to the landscaping thing, but like if I was constantly going out telling the landscapers to stop doing landscaping, at a certain point, I'd have to say, okay, what can I do to take accountability um, for this boundary that I've been keep trying to set. And so it was putting the headphones on. For you, it may be like walking around the block when you're frustrated with something, redirecting a conversation when a certain topic gets brought up that you've asked to not be brought up. And we can gently remind people of our boundaries, but they're only going to remember so much anyways. And so I think there is some grace that I try to give other people, that you know, I request of a boundary, they don't respect it. And I'm like, well, think of how much is like flooded into our existence on a daily basis. They may just like have passed their mind, right? Or maybe they genuinely don't care. And I can learn to allow them to not care.
I think that's a really powerful concept, Rex. I think that the willingness and the ability to step back and say, you know what, that person has a lot going on in their life, or maybe I'm not the center of their life. I'm not the person that they think about all day long every day and think about what I need, and I need to be okay with that. And it makes it so I'm not seeing myself as the center of the universe, which is so easy for me to do. I think that's a super powerful way of explaining that. Do you have any other further thoughts on that?
No, I think it just really, reminded me of the whole crosstalk thing. Like that power of letting people have their own emotions and feelings and being okay with it. And like I said, it has really reduced for me at least my people pleasing. And it's a really tough practice if you're new to setting a boundary, or you're new to saying what's on your mind, or you're new to expressing a feeling. Like, I know that sounds wild, but if you're not used to saying how you feel and then you go around all of a sudden expressing it, there's a lot of people that it may be like, what is this person doing? They've never been like this. Or you all of a sudden are the one deciding what everyone's going to have for dinner, when before, what do you want? Oh, what do you want? But that's, like I said, going back into that connection with the higher power, trusting your intuition, trusting that if you want pizza that night, it's okay. And if someone else wants chicken nuggets, they can get chicken nuggets, and that's okay. And you don't need to change that unless you're the one ordering the food. Then maybe you do.
That's good stuff. Thank you so much, Rex. All right, we have another question from an anonymous member of our audience here. This person says, how do you deal with inconsistency in relationships? Now, here's a little bit of a qualifier on that. I've been triggered recently as I found more than two people in life just seem to have dropped off the face of the earth after a relationship has been built up. However, they're still on social media. So how do you deal with those feelings that come up of, is it me in this inconsistency of relationships?
Yeah, inconsistency in relationships. I think that if so, for me, there's a couple tools that I would use. It's if you haven't been through the steps, you could probably look them up, or maybe go to a meeting of whatever your chosen recovery program is. But I would use the 10th step, excuse me, which is where you kind of do a little bit of self-searching around what your resentment is and looking at what the pain that's kind of happening and these different aspects of where you're being selfish, dishonest, afraid, and then what will God have you be. And using that tool for me gives me another lens of what could possibly be going on, especially if it's kind of a recurring thing. And then the other part would be leaning into trusting that your higher power may have taken those people out of your life for a reason. And I think that sometimes is the hardest pill to swallow. That's for me, at least, being a alcoholic and addict. I'm like, wait, but I want to take I want to manage and control this. I want them to perceive me in a certain way, right? That's the codependent part. I want everyone to like me. I want everyone to be okay. And sometimes it's just not a fit. And it may not be a thing where it's not a fit. It may just be not a fit now. It may be not a fit ever. And learning how to trust that, like, your relationship with whatever you believe in, has your back and truly is like protecting you right now from whatever that is. Um, and I know that's all one of those things that's like easier said than done. And then the last part that, like, I would say that I learned from CODA is then feeling however you feel. If you're hurt by it and you're upset by it, you can be hurt and upset, and that's okay. And you don't need to deny that. Um, and finally, if you need to talk to them about it, talking to them about it. But I think as you grow that kind of like relationship with your higher power and your self-confidence, there's going to probably be a lot of trust and acceptance around why those people kind of fell off, and you'll probably start attracting different people.
Thank you so much, Rex. One of the questions I have written down, this is from one of the very first things you said when you started your share today, is that when you first went into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous when you were really young, you went in and you saw the differences rather than the similarities. How has that shifted over the years, and how do you expand that, looking for similarities, even in people that you think, man, that person has nothing in common with me? And how does that help you in your own recovery, looking for similarities rather than differences?
Um, so when it comes to the rooms in particular, I think that it's really taught me um, to just listen and take away some of the physical forms. Sometimes I'll even be in meetings, I'll just like close my eyes, right? And then finding the similarities in like day-to-day life with people. Just what I try to do pretty frequently is like, I just remember that we're all just like skin and bones and organs and stuff. And we're just these blobs kind of existing with these really cool souls, right? And everyone's soul is so incredibly unique and different. And sometimes even if I can't fully relate to someone, and this goes once again back to the crosstalk thing, right? I'm learning how to let people have their own experience, even if it's something that's not a similarity for me necessarily. But within the space of someone having their own experience, there's this really interesting like form of like love and acceptance that I have of other people, even among the differences. Now, when it comes to alcoholic and drug recovery for me, um, listening for those similarities has helped grow my program because I want to be kind of diligent about identifying myself as an alcoholic or addict because it can help another person. It can help grow my program. And even, I guess, in CODA too, to where I'm able to kind of walk shoulder to shoulder with another person through the program, and not be like in an ego way, right? Like above or below another. And so I think it kind of creates that constant like leveling of humanness when I'm uh like taking the ego kind of out of all of it and listening for those similarities.
Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to dive into that just a little bit more. Do you have like an example in your life, whether it be in the rooms of recovery or whether it be out in the world outside of the rooms of recovery, where you came across somebody who initially you're like, that person is so different than me. I want nothing to do with that person. And then as you allowed yourself to listen to the similarities, your total perception shifted.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about, and this is, I was talking to someone recently about business meetings, and they're like, yeah, there's that always that one guy, like just they're kind of joking around. But when I was in a young person group, there was a guy in the meeting, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we do not have anything in common. I could not stand to listen to him. I would just shut down every time that he would speak up, right? And then over time, I finally got to a place, and I don't know if it just took time because I was in this home group for a long time. But I finally one day was talking to him outside of a meeting, and I don't remember what he was upset about or what was going on, but all of a sudden it was kind of like I saw, we were just talking one on one, and I saw someone who was just a hurt person. It had nothing to do with the speaking up, right? It was whatever was going on in his life. And I think the vulnerability that he had kind of shared with me, it's interesting how, and I could relate to it on a deeper level, that I was able then to kind of like shift the dynamic between us in the future. And instead of coming at him with almost like a rage when he would just exist, it was more like that dissipated, and I was able to kind of love and accept this person. And I think there was a level of like acceptance of kind of the quirkiness of who they were as a human and their personality. And it wasn't like we became BFFs or anything like that, but but it was cool to kind of relate to someone who no longer frustrated me. I was like, oh, this is just this person. And there was more love that I kind of felt towards him than this like frustration and upset.
Thank you so much for sharing that shift of perception. I really appreciate that. Before we start wrapping up, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us, Rax?
I think just remembering to take time for yourself. And I honestly still struggle to that with that to this day. Taking time for yourself and like I mentioned before, just whatever program you're in, being really patient and loving and kind to yourself, because I think for me, I spent so many years as just like my own punching bag that I'm still working on it, right? But like that giving myself that grace and space to just give my inner soul a hug sometimes is really nice. So that would be it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rax. Really appreciate it. That was a great Rico 12 weekly speaker meeting. If anybody else out here has a question for Rax that you'd like to ask and put out there to either her or the community, please send an email to me at rico12pod@gmail.com. I can connect you with Rax through there if you would like to. Also, if you are part of our WhatsApp community, you can post those questions there, and we as a community can look at that. We had a really cool conversation this last week on long-standing resentments in that community. So put those questions in there, and there's a really cool support group there that will help you walk through those questions. If you haven't already done so, please consider going and rating and reviewing Rico 12 on Apple Podcasts. It's a powerful way to work Step 12, getting the message out to more people who may just need to hear this message from Rax today. Next Friday, I'm excited to hear from somebody. I did get an email from somebody who said that they may be available this next Friday. So we probably have somebody lined up. But if you would like to be a future guest speaker, please consider sending an email to rico12pod@gmail.com. We can get something lined up for the future. All right. Before we close out of here, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the Serenity Prayer. Rax, are you willing to say that for us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Thank you so much, Rax. Remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back, and when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
There was a man put his hand by the side of his mouth, and he wanted to scream, but the sound never came out. So he reached for the bottle to wash the pain away, 'cause what he wanted so badly was to live a different way. And all of his problems and all of his pain filled up the puddle and rose with the rain. His ship kept on sinking to the bottom of the lake, and he knew for certain that he was just a fake, just a fake. Was a man put his hand by the side of his mouth, and he wanted to share, but only lies ever came out. So he reached for the needle to numb the pain inside, and the truth that he yearned for shriveled up and died. And all of his problems and all of his pain filled by the side of his mouth as he read from the book, only truth spilled out. So he reached for a power to help him through the night. 'Cause what lives in the darkness dies in the light. Yeah, what lives in the darkness dies.